Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Mr. Maynard here, and welcome to Chapter 4 of our textbook, Human Services and Ethical Practice. Now, as you know, your textbook does cover this chapter. However, ethical practice is one of the most important topics in all of human services. It's something that you'll have to work with no matter what level of human services you work on. And because of that, and because of how complex it can be, I wanted to make sure to provide both the textbook reading and this brief PowerPoint with my lecture notes as well. That way, hopefully, we just get a better understanding of human services and ethical practices. Now, as you know, throughout this course, HMS 101, we cover the fundamentals that are going to help prepare you for a career as a human service professional. And with that in mind, the most absolute foundation of our work is ethics. So I don't want you to think about this as another term or another textbook chapter. I want you to realize how important it is and realize it's the moral compass that will guide every decision you make as a practitioner. So, what exactly is this moral compass? Simply put, ethics are the principles that guide our behavior, helping us make the right decisions even when things are complicated. In our field, ethical practice is all about one core thing: doing what's right for our clients and the community. Ethics is what protects the people we serve, defines our professional identity, and separates a job from a true profession. So, ethical practice and that professional identity we've been talking about is built on six key principles. And these aren't just abstract ideas. These are the values that form the very core of our work. These are the values that we'll have to put into use every day that we show up to work with a client. And these values are autonomy, and autonomy is about respecting a client's right to make their own choices. Remember, we don't make decisions for our clients. We empower them to take control of their own life. The second core principle is non-malfeasance. Now, it sounds complex, but it's really simple. It's our primary duty that no matter what, we do no harm to our clients. The opposite of that, the opposite of malfeasance, is beneficence. And as I said, it's the opposite of malfeasance. It's actively doing good. It's the ethical mandate we have to always act in our client's best interest. Our next ethical principle is justice, which means we promote equality and fairness, making sure that every person gets a fair shake. Our next our next core principle, I should say, is fidelity. And fidelity is about trust. We have to be faithful and loyal to our clients and our promises. We have to honor what we tell a client. And finally, our last ethical principle is veracity. And veracity is just a fancy word of saying honesty. It means being truthful and honest with our clients. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, Mr. Maynard, thank you for explaining ethics to us and talking to us about these six core principles, but how do they actually work? When will I actually use these in my practice with clients? And I'm so glad you asked, because there are several examples of when you'll use these. Let's go over a few together so we get a better idea. Autonomy, letting a client choose their own goals for a treatment plan. This is something that we will be dealing with every time we work with a client. We want to make sure a client realizes we're not there to make decisions for them. No, they have the right to autonomy. They have the right to make their own decisions. Now, may we help advise them? Yeah, but ultimately, it is their choice to make their own decisions, unless it's mandated treatment. That's a little bit different. But in general, we give that autonomy. We make sure our clients can choose their own goals for a treatment plan. And a quick example of this could be maybe you have a client who's in high school and they decide they want to drop out of high school and get a GED instead of a high school diploma. Now, you and I might know that sticking through high school and getting the diploma may be a more wise decision. It may be a better path and an easier path. However, we do have to respect the right of our clients to choose. And if our client's 18 and chooses to drop out of school and go for that GED, we have to help them pursue it. Non-malfeasance. Again, this is avoiding a treatment you know could be harmful. That's an example of how we could use that. a certain treatment, maybe we read that a certain treatment has a high risk of negative side effects. And instead of recommending that to our clients, we find a safer alternative that lets our client avoid those negative side effects. Again, do no harm. That's what I want you to think of when you think of non-malfeasance. Do no harm. Beneficence, the opposite of malfeasance. Um, Recommending a program that is a perfect fit for a client's needs. One example, maybe you have a client who could really do well with working with a certain support group, and you know that's a perfect fit, so you recommend that to that client. You're always trying to, do good and recommend your clients to things that can help them. That's beneficence. Justice, ensuring all clients have access to the same resource regardless of their background. Again, justice is about equality. It's about social justice. And a good example of that would be maybe you notice that there's an online sign up form for a food pantry. However, when you're going to sign up a client or you're going to try to help sign people up, you notice that these sign up forms for this food pantry require a home address. Well, that means if you have a client who's experiencing homelessness, they have a barrier. So justice would be working either with that client to help them fill out the form regardless of that, or working with the actual pantry itself to make sure that they can allow people who don't have addresses to apply. Again, it's just trying to make sure everything's equal for everyone. Fidelity, keeping promises you make to a client. That's simple. And a good example, you tell a client you'll check on their housing application by the end of the day. That means you follow through on that promise and you check on that housing application by the end of the day. We build trust with the client. We build that therapeutic relationship. Fidelity is extremely important. We don't lie to our clients. Finally, veracity, giving a client honest information, even if it's difficult. Um, maybe a client asks you directly, hey, am I going to be able to get an apartment right now? You worked with me on that housing application. How long is it going to take? And you honestly tell them, hey, no, this may take a few weeks. You're being honest with that client, even though that's probably not the answer the client wants to hear. But doing so, you let that client know you're truthful and you manage your expectations. You help them manage their expectations respectfully and realistically. So again, these are just some examples. I'm sure many of you could think of many more. So another topic this chapter covers is codes of ethics. And if you'll look throughout the chapter and your discussion question next week, if I'm not mistaken, also will have you look at these different codes of ethics. Several different professional organizations have codes of ethics. And again, this goes back to those principles that we were just talking about earlier. They're not just ideas. Our professional organizations such as the National Association of Social Workers, National Association of Counselors, Human Services has a code of ethics. Several of these organizations, especially helping organizations, have codes of ethics. And these codes of ethics aren't suggestions like some people would think they are. Instead, they're more like ground rules. They give us clear guidelines for our professional behavior. They protect our clients. They protect us as well. And codes of ethics serve as a benchmark for enforcing professional standards. Codes of ethics are how we, as a community of professionals, can hold ourselves accountable. For example, if we work with a client and we decide to make a decision, we should always be able to back up and say, here's where the code of ethics supports the decision I just made. And if we find ourselves going, here's where the code of ethics does not support the decision I just made, that is where we can get ourselves into trouble. So that's just something to keep in mind. Be realistic with codes of ethics. We can't turn to the code of ethics to have an automatic decision to give us an automatic decision for every possible problem or situation that we face. They're not a magical solution, and they don't cover every single unique situations. And sometimes, even when they do, we run into the issue that they conflict with state or federal laws. For example, if you think about if you've ever worked in healthcare, you've heard of the Health Insurance HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And even though our codes of ethics have certain requirements on confidentiality, HIPAA, which protects patient privacy, can add more rules to what your ethical code already says about confidentiality. So that can be one of the limitations where a code of ethics are. The world is constantly changing. And with the world changing constantly and evolving and new technologies being adapted, so are the ethical challenges we face. The law, as we just discussed with HIPAA earlier, directly impacts how we handle sensitive information. And for the most part, laws often always override ethical codes if it's necessary to protect public safety. And we also have to remember another influence on our ethical codes and our ethics is diversity. Our country is incredibly diverse, and it's becoming more and more diverse by the day. We have to make sure that our ethical codes are flexible enough to respect different cultural values. And this is where cultural competence comes in, and we'll be talking about that more throughout the course and more throughout human services if you continue to take human services courses. Finally, we have to remember that technology itself has added a whole new layer of complexity with online counseling, electronic records, and social media. We have to be careful to stay within our expertise and protect our client data in the digital world. And that is just going to continue to be more and more complex, the laws and ethics that surround online work. Share some key ethical concerns that you're going to encounter as you practice human services. As you begin your career, you'll encounter these concepts on a daily basis. Competence, which means you have a professional obligation to make sure you're qualified and knowledgeable enough to help a client. We want to make sure that we are properly competent when helping our clients. Responsibility. This concerns all your obligations to your clients, your colleagues, your employer, and yourself. Are you responsible? Confidentiality, which we've discussed. And that confidentiality means this is the core promise not to share a client's information. You'll also hear about privileged communication, a legal term that gives a client the right to refuse to have their information released in a court of law. And there's relative confidentiality, which is the informal sharing of information amongst the treatment team to help a client. Confidentiality gets very, very tricky, and you'll learn a lot more about that in HMS 102, which I know many of you are in as well. We covered a little bit more there. But and also remember that there are limits to confidentiality. As we know, in Kentucky, all of us are mandated reporters, and we know that there are requirements to come with that. And finally, you will encounter competence, responsibility, confidentiality, and client rights, meaning that every client has the right to privacy and the right to give informed consent, meaning they've understood the information about your services and they've agreed to participate. So when an ethical dilemma comes up, what do? You use a model. This 6-step process helps you think about think through a tough situation. Think of it as a blueprint for making professional and moral choices. So let's look at this model here that we have before us here. And there's lots of different models on ethical decision making. This is just one that I've chosen. And it kind of helps us, though, step by step, learn how we can deal with ethical dilemmas and ethical problems. The first step of the ethical decision making model is to identify the problem. What is the ethical conflict? What is the specific conflict that we are facing? Until we know what the problem is, we can't make any decisions. This next step, after we've discovered or identified the problem, is we review our ethical standards. We need to look at our profession's code of ethics for guidance. Again, there's several different codes of ethics depending on where you fall within the human services spectrum. So we would look at our profession's code of ethics. Step 3, it's always good to consult with colleagues. This can be a supervisor, a mentor, a trusted peer, a coworker. Just remember that you never have to solve a problem alone, and it's always good to get someone else's educated opinion on the situation. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. Step 4 is to identify and explore options. We want to make sure that we brainstorm possible solution. We want to look at all possible courses of actions we can take to make sure we don't just have tunnel vision. Finally, after we've identified, reviewed, consulted, and explored options, we have to choose a course of action. We have to decide on the best path forward. And finally, after we do that, we we look back at it, we evaluate. We say, how did it go? Was the choice successful? And if this situation happens again, would we do it the same? Would we make the same choice? It's very important, evaluation is in human services, because it's how we grow as a profession and as professionals. Finally, we need to answer why it's important to have an ethical decision making model. And it's simple. Ethical dilemmas will occur. Keep in mind, if you face an ethical dilemma as a practitioner, it's not a sign of failure. Ethical dilemmas are a normal part of the job. This model is just a practical tool to help you navigate some of those situations. It gives you a structured way of thinking so you can make choices that are both professional and ethically sound. And remember, this model will not make the decision for you. Your code of ethics will not make the decision for you. All this is just resources to help you make that decision that is ethical, that is based on those principles, that is based on a code of ethics that is well thought through. Again, this is just a small lecture to go along with your reading. This chapter I know can be a bit confusing, so if you do run into any problems, please reach out. I'm always here.